me tell you a little bit about the address. I mentioned that Dr. Sheth has written over 30 books. This is his latest book and is really the theme surrounding his talk today, which is genes, climate, and consumption culture, connecting the dots. And you'll see it's really a thread through many of the seminal works that we've enjoyed from Professor Sheth over the years. Among other things that may or may not find expression today, about, I guess, almost 15 years ago, Professor Sheth, or Jag as he is known actually throughout the industry and certainly faculty circles in the US, was one of the first to see the emerging nexus between India and China. He coined the idea of Chindia and in fact created an institute, created an initiative out of Singapore to primarily stimulate not only both countries, governments, but businesses, individuals, to look at the emerging opportunities between what will become again the two leading nations of the world. One of the things I'm often fond of saying, in the year 1600, India and China were number one and number two in the world. What's 500 years in the life of the Earth? Not that much. In reality, some stars from certain planets are still traveling at the speed of light and they still haven't made it back here. So it's a brief 500 years. In the year 2100, again, India and China will be the number one and number two economies in the world. So again, it's an instance of the way Dr. Sheth has been a visionary. He sees things early. He sees things in ways that others do not necessarily easily comprehend at that point. So he's a master at connecting the dots. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Jagdish N.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me okay in the back? Can you see me also? Those are the jokes of the short people, okay? You know that. Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, Shubro, President, and my student, guest, and audience. I'm really delighted to be here. Really, really delighted. It's a great campus. Shiv Nadar University has done wonderfully well actually to have a global reputation now, which is why I accepted the award also. I think you are excelling in engineering very, very well. Management is coming up on the board and it's fascinating to see. I think you are one of the lead institutions where undergraduates do academic research. Undergraduates are the best talent out there, and we somehow divided the world between undergraduates and graduates, as if graduates are research, undergraduates are only learning. We are flipping the whole area, and very smart people are out there. We will incubate a lot more human beings to do further things in terms of masters and doctorate all over the world, and they will make you proud, okay? So I just wanted to mention that on the side. Now my presentation, and I will get out of the podium in a moment. I went to United States in 1961 as a foreign graduate student, finished my coursework and everything very quickly. Then I joined Columbia University in 1963 as a faculty member. All my colleagues were Americans, not a single Indian faculty. And they said, we don't know how to pronounce your name, Jagdish, Yagdish, etc. So we'll call you Jag, like in Jaguar. Ever since that association, I've been dreaming of owning a Jaguar with a license plate Jags Jag, right? In America, we call vanity plates. And I used to always talk about this thing. And my dream became a reality 19 years ago when I turned 60. I'm 79. Do I look 79? That's because you should be in marketing. Because in marketing, the first thing we learn and teach, it's all about packaging, right? That's what it is here. So, but it's true story. I have two grown-up children, both married. They're in their 50s now, actually, interestingly. And they surprised me on my birthday. I come from the old generation where birthday is one more day. I live in the US in Atlanta, so I went out to get my newspaper, turn around and saw this beautiful Jaguar parked in the driveway with a handwritten license plate, Jags Jag, happy birthday. It was a Jaguar XJ model. Even the color I locked. Isn't that nice? You can clap. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a rental car. True story. So I'm still looking for my Jaguar, okay? Isn't that ironic? 20 years ago, nobody would have imagined, including people who look into the future, that the British official car, which is Jaguar, all diplomatic events, Jaguar is the official car. America is Cadillac, Germans have Mercedes-Benz, will be bought by an Indian, an ex-colony enterprise, Tata Motors. World is changing that fast, which is one part of the, I won't do the presentation on that, which is what Shubhro mentioned about how much world is changing, but I'll talk about something else that is very fascinating. You see clearly differences in India between North Indians and South Indians in the way we consume food, right? Our diets are different. One is wheat-based, other one is rice-based, predominantly. Of course, we indulge into each other like a delicacy or once in a while change, but generally that's the dividing line. Northern India has paneer as a concept. South Indian diet has no paneer at all, zero. Both need saturated fat in the body. North India gets it from the saturated fat from animal-based, cow in this case, the milk, the yogurt, etc. South India primarily relies on oil, coconut oil, olive oil in Mediterranean countries, or avocado in Mexico. This is what I will talk about, how our cultural, we attribute consumption differences to cultural differences, but cultural differences themselves, which are pretty much norms put by society for you to behave in the right way. Religion puts norms, family puts norms. So even my view is that the cultural differences themselves are anchored to something more fundamental. As a scientist, you want to know why these differences are there. We as a scientist are always thinking about the question why, not what it is or how it is. We need a theory, an explanation. In anthropology, we have all the theories of cultural evolutions, but there are we have all the evidence of cultural differences, but there is no really theory of culture. So this tries to put that theory, and I'll tell you in a moment how it is done. These differences are very sharp in the clothing that we wear. You can again think about the South Indian clothing, North Indian. In the movies, you will see those exaggerated even more, right? Really dramatic things, you can see the difference. You can see the shelter, the way the homes are built. Here are three necessities of life: food, shelter, and clothing. All civilized societies have to have those three. And obviously, but there are differences. The question is why? That's the question I started about 15 years ago as my journey to do research. And it came from a very different place. I was asked by Coca-Cola company in America on a worldwide market, international division, to find why some countries drink very little Coca-Cola and other countries drink a lot of Coca-Cola. Lowest was 64 bottles per capita. Highest was 400 bottles per capita. So if you are a statistician, you know average makes no sense. The range or the standard deviation is very large. It's quite large, 64 to 400, right? And the question is why? What do you think? Why some countries drink more Coca-Cola than other countries? Anybody? What do you think? Availability factors? Environmental factors, okay. Like what? Correct? Okay, you are exactly right. It has to do with the climate, which is why in the book there is a question called climate, or a word called climate, right? Climate matters pretty much. If you go and talk to managers, and I find fascinating, every manager or all of us have a theories. We cannot live without an explanation. We don't simply say everything is through chance on the one hand, or to destiny, for example. We believe there has to be an explanation of how the world evolves, how the world behaves. Every manager has a theory. So we asked managers, what do you think? They came out with theories as to why there will be difference between one country, 64 bottles, to 400 countries, another country with 400 bottles. What do you think? What they came out with? Somebody came out with a bad water. Countries that have bad water, because water is a normal substitute otherwise. Till somebody in the same audience, brainy person, simply said, you know, if the water was so bad, natives would have died long ago, and I know dead people don't drink Coca-Cola. Very satirical, very sarcastic. Interesting, right? So that hypothesis was thrown out. Somebody said that it's an expensive product, so must be income, per capita income. So we correlated per capita income with the per capita consumption, and we found, lo and behold, contrary to hypotheses, actually it was a negative correlation. Poorer country drank more Coca-Cola than the richer countries. So that hypothesis was thrown out. Ultimately, we had so many different information or data or variables, as we call it, and out of that one, 2 came out, all of them explaining 97% of the difference between 64 to 400, and the dominant of the 2 was the climate, which led to whole new discovery. This is what science is all about. And world-class scientists are now writing popular books. In medical field, they are coming out with breakthrough knowledge, but they are bestsellers on the New York Times list, for example. Interestingly, the second factor other than climate would be what? What do you think makes difference in consumption of people from one country to the other? And of course, within a country, there will be changes depending upon what factor comes about. What do you think? The second factor was age. Younger the country and warmer the climate, more consumption of Coca-Cola. Lowest is colder the country, older the population. That turned out to be Sweden, 64 bottles. Highest was in Mexico, that turned out to be younger, very young population, younger than India actually, and also warmer climate. So that led to this whole journey. How many of you heard of Rudyard Kipling in your earlier classes, right? All of us, we studied that. Remember Rudyard Kipling wrote a very nice book about the East and the West. East is East, West is West, and the twain shall never meet. He's dead wrong. He's not only dead, but he's wrong. You have seen how westernized we are, right? In our dress codes, in the behavior, etc. And how now easternization of the world is taking place. In fact, spirituality leads. All Christians are looking for meaning inside themselves, not some external entity. They are adopting Buddhism. In the US alone, we think by 2020, 6 million born Christians will all become Buddhists. Yoga is no longer just an Indian thing, it is a global event now, partly promoting by, the nations, United Nations. Our Prime Minister is a big advocate, but it is adopted now in French school curriculum as a mandatory course, just like physical exercises. So West is learning from the East now quite a lot. Fusion you see primarily in foods. Music you can see lots of influence of the Eastern musical cultures mixed with Western cultures. Ours is a lot more improvisation. Theirs is by standard, classical music. Western is organized by chart, etc. So we are fusing what's improvisation, which only jazz does it in the US, for example, with something that is very much a rigid activity where you repeat, learn and perfect it kind of notion. That's very interesting. Fusion in music. Cuisines, have you seen cuisines are now getting fused? In England, for example, today, the most popular convenient food is no longer, in fact, fish and chips, which is their traditional food. It is the Indian curry, tikka masala. Not Indians eating that, but all British are eating that, which is fascinating again. So now there is a fusion taking place. We have studied East-West differences, cultural, spiritual, economic, maybe political even, but we have not studied North-South. There is not too much research about the North versus South differences, which is what I try to understand from this Coca-Cola study. So if you take a cheese, Well, let me talk about the background. If you believe the old anthropological and paleontologists who study pre-civilization days, like Jared Diamond, who is a well-respected scholar but writes popular books, genes migrated all over the world from Africa. As the genes migrate from tropical area to temperate and to Arctic, there are 3 climatic zones, they have to adapt to survive. One thing I find fascinating, humans as a species are very adaptable. We adapt all the time. Even culturally, we adapt all the time. Even though in organizations, we always say, hardest thing is to bring about a culture change, right? I don't buy that at all. Depends upon you knowing how to mold them. We are a very moldable resource compared to agriculture or an industrial raw material. I can do a lot more things with the humans if I know how to do it, right? So this north-south axis is that if the genes went all the way to northern Europe, Europe is very clear dividing. Above the Alps, you can see the difference. Not only the hair is blonde rather than a black or a brown, for example. Eyes are blue, for example. You can see all the color differences in the body. But how about eating? Where do you get your protein? Where do you get your calorie? Where do you get your saturated fat? 3 ingredients, nutrients you need in the body to survive. It shifts from vegetation, fruits, plants, to animal only. Animal is the only source, or fish in some places if you are coastal. And therefore, genes adapt to more an animal-based diet. The consequence is that if you go to Scandinavia, Scandinavians actually have over the time evolved so that their arteries are wider. Arteries of the tropical country, people are very narrow, which means any little blockage you can get more hypertension than they would get. You will get cardiovascular diseases differently between them and us. We may not get a second chance. You drop dead. They might get a second chance. It's very fascinating how nature tries to survive the human species or the genes of the human species, which is how I began to find out. By the way, you take the most saturated fat in the world is the blubber of the whale. Eskimos can eat 3 times a day, like we eat chapati or idli sambar, whatever we eat, and nothing will happen to them. If you give that diet to a Italian, especially southern Italian, they won't survive. So there's this something about the gene and the sourcing, where you get sourcing, is there is a compatibility. That's what this research ultimately leads to. So now you take cheese. If you go to Northern Europe, Swiss cheese and above, it will have 40% fat content. As you come to the Mediterranean countries, the cheese is still there, but the content is 2.5%. Like in pizza, we have, for example, Parmesan cheese, feta cheese in Greece, all of that stuff. And then as you come further south, as I mentioned, concept of cheese drops from all over the world. So there are no differences between Mexico and India when it comes to consumption of olive oil, avocado, or sesame oil, or in our case, peanut oil is quite common, and definitely coconut oil. The molecules are different for coconut oil than they are for other saturated fat. Interesting. Body protects itself, right? So Northern Europeans have no spices. They can't grow any. In fact, they have gone all over the world in excursions to find spices. They have come to India to look for spices. Warm climates will have lots of spices because they are your daily antibacteria, antioxidants. Whether it's a turmeric, which we put in every curry, for example, or parsley, which we put in every place. We have all this nature and the plant-based antioxidants, etc. Northern European diet, spices would be only salt and pepper. They think that's a spice. Northern Europeans' diet is basically what we call meat and potatoes. That's it. Potato can be grown and stored throughout the winter, etc., which is again very interesting. So spices vary as you go up and down the geography, which is interesting. Now you take second area, which has to do with clothing. Northern Europeans will always have tight-fitting 3 layers of clothing. Body contour shows. That's for insulation. their sourcing for anything that you make as a clothing will be again animal, so wool and leather are preferred materials. In warm climates, wool and leather are both very harmful materials. Not just benign, but they are harmful. So in warmer climates, it will be usually a cotton or a linen. We are the largest cotton consumer in the world, and we are the largest cotton producer in the world now for export as well as domestic one. We have a very good textile industry in the process we have created, and that's very interesting. We are basically cotton based. Most tropical countries will be cotton based. Garments will be prepared so one layer only, free flowing to allow hydration and dehydration, because you do need in a hot and perspiring country, hydration, dehydration is absolutely essential. They don't need that. Fascinating again. Northern Europeans cannot have any color. There is no vegetation, there is no dye. So they will have basically color preferences culturally like what I have, pastel colors, subdued. If you have colorful shirts or colorful clothing, you are somebody unique, different, you don't belong here culturally. Have you seen that thing? Warm climates. How many colors of sari we have? I go to a sari store just to watch the colors and I'm in awe how many varieties we have. It's infinite. But so is true of African native dresses. So is true of Mexican dresses, natives for example. In Peru, when I went there, found same thing. It's very similar to our color preferences, right? So there is that whole tropical area where colors are always vivid, very exuberant essentially, and they are really attractive in many ways. So again, there is a difference in colors, in the material, and in the design. That's for the shelter. I found fascinating that shoes also have a similar issues. Northern Europeans would have a preference for boots, preferably with 2 pairs of socks. If you don't wear socks, they will look down on you. Culturally, the norm is that it's incompatible with the weather, you're going to have a frostbite. So most of the cultural norms, either by faith or by clan or community or by family, are designed for us to behave properly for the climate in which we live. By making it a faith-based obligation, we obey a lot more. So most of the culture that comes from norms established by the society are also anchored to the geography. Those boots become shoes as you go toward Mediterranean. Shoes become sandals, no socks, and sandals becomes tongs. Isn't that interesting? Very predictable. In India, this is creating a problem because now we are modernizing and therefore we wear shoes 12 to 14 hours a day. Confine our feet. In order to wear the shoes, we have to wear socks, for example. And actually, in the process, the side effect is that we are creating a huge podiatry practice in medicine. People have more feet problem now because we are living like modern world as if the norm of the Northern European is the norm that is appropriate for us. It may be not the case, right? I just want to mention that. Our genes are still very pure. The Oriental genes have not mixed with non-Oriental. Ours are Caucasian genes, primarily Mediterranean, Jewish, Greek, for example, Italian, and then it migrates to our side. Whatever the theories you have about migration, but this is the genes. Scandinavian genes are slightly different than ours, for example. Native African genes are very different. All medical people will tell you that as you do research on HIV/AIDS, there are very different species of HIV/AIDS for each of those racial compositions or gene compositions primarily. That again is very fascinating. The body is designed by the nature to fit with the climate. Whether it's a nose structure, color of the skin, darkness of the hair is all designed, which says there is no such thing as superior versus inferior. That is something we impose as a value judgment. They're all equal. In their climate, that's the best thing to do. So we are trying to disassociate all these judgmental things we do from a scientific viewpoint, right? Now we take shelter, the third area, and I'll take about 5 more minutes on something else. Shelter. Northern Europeans have to build from the materials which is rocks, stones, and from trees, mostly fir trees. In warm climate, that tree-based house will be actually dangerous because termites will eat it away. Northern Europeans will have roofs always A-shaped. If you just go to Switzerland and above, because snow, if it stays on the roof, it will collapse the roof. Every architect knows this thing, but consumer experts don't. Consumer marketer companies don't, which is very fascinating to me. So as I talk to the architects, they say, of course, what else is new? It's so obvious that we design the homes to be compatible with the climate or the geography. Northern Europeans will always have a room from the outdoor to the indoor. They insulate, and there'll be a place called foyer. As you enter from extreme cold, don't get the extreme heat, so you have a place in middle, which is semi-cold essentially, or semi-warm. Warmer countries don't have that thing. Indoor and the outdoor blends totally. That's a Spanish villa, Italian villa. Our homes here, the deck outside, Agassi or whatever we call it, in my language is called Agassi, terrace, you blend everything. Color preferences. Northern Europeans will have very subdued colors. We like to decorate our homes, even outside walls and definitely inside. We are very colorful. Again, because nature blesses us with vegetation from which we can make dyes. Now, all of this is changing with modernization, with digital world that's emerging, but it's creating confusion as to our culture should dominate us or globalization should dominate. That's a key difference that I'll come to. So these are the food, shelter, and clothing. Then it occurred to me, culture has certain dimensions. One of the key dimensions in culture is time. Northern Europeans or Northerners generally will be very time conscious, punctuality. You begin at this time, you end at this time. Warmer climate people, doesn't matter. You come whenever you want to, you can go whenever you want to. It's like an open house. Now, I lived in Denmark in 1976 as a visiting professor, and I hosted a dinner at our house. I was used to time punctuality because I lived in Midwest, which is very much like Germanic culture. But in America, we allow 15 minutes window. So if you invite people at 6 in the evening, they will come 6 to 6:15, but not after 6:15. So I must have invited 10, 12 families, couples. And we always are running a little late as Indians. We never are on time beforehand. We are always rushing at the end. So my wife is still preparing, and all of a sudden, 6 o'clock sharp, 15 families all walk in. As if they were gathering outside. So as I got curious, I said, how come you are always, all of you are exactly on the dot? He says, it's rude to come late. It's interesting. I find that too at funeral services. You have to be on time in funeral, It's interesting. On time in weddings just goes on, and I'll talk about the weddings in a moment. Very fascinating. And they said, we have to learn to come on time. And he said, why aren't you ready? They're friends, so they told me. And I said, look, we have this Midwest ritual of about 15 minutes. It's okay. And they were not as pleased because host has to be ready before they come. That's the norm imposed by their climate. Why their climate? Because in Northern Europe, climate changes so dramatically. In America, we have weathermen telling us every hour what the weather will be. Here, weatherman is irrelevant. It's the same weather from morning till evening. Monsoon will come at this time, Cold will be at this time. Fog, smog will be at this time. It's very predictable. So why should I watch weather channels? Over there, I'm obsessed about weather. See? Because I'm now westernizing myself, which is fascinating. So that was a very key incident in my mind. So punctuality, because in Northern Europe, the window of planting and harvesting is very limited. And if you don't do the right time of planting and right time of harvesting, you lose a whole year of livelihood. It's a survival instinct primarily. So punctuality comes about. Second one, among the anthropologists, there are two major anthropologists in management area, Hofstede from Netherlands or Germany, and Theodore Hall, who was a University of Chicago top anthropologist, but he went into applied field also like business and marketing, and he came out with 5 silent languages. Language of time, language of space, Northerners will be very territorial. This is my space. I sit at this time in my first class. It's stakeholding, it's mine, don't encroach that anymore. So when we go to countries like America or Northern Europe, they want their space. If you are too close to the person, they don't like it. Ours is okay. The jokes are that in the lift or the elevator, if you have 4 Northern Europeans, what do? They go in 4 corners. If you put 4 Asians, Chinese or us, they're all in one corner. Typical cultural things, right? These are all consumption behaviors, which is interesting. So that's clearly one. Second dimension related to the space and time is uncertainty avoidance. Some cultures are very much, they don't like to do anything improvisation planned. And you have to have a script. It begins at this time, 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:05, somebody else will come. There's a whole scrolling or whatever they call it. There's a whole run of the show or something. Very, very precise, like the television guys do, which they have to be precise, but this is cultural trait. And other countries, it doesn't matter. When the event begins, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes is okay. So uncertainty avoidance is a key area through planning. So now I'll take an anecdote and I can back it up with research. How many of you attended a Christian wedding? Especially Northern European Protestant-based Christian wedding. How many of you attended a Indian wedding? All of you raise your hand. You attended when you did not know you were attending, little child, okay? It's interesting. Christian weddings are planned out 1.5 years. The priest is rehearsing what he will say. I pronounce you man and a wife or something, but he rehearses for that. Bride has her own vows. She prepares. Bridegroom has their own vows. There is an exchange of the ring properly taking place. In the movies you will see the typical Christian wedding. It starts on time, everybody's tense. See, I'm an outside observer, right? So I look at it as an analyst. Very fascinating. So that's really what happens. And everybody has a sigh of relief. No intervention. Nobody can object to the wedding. Although they will allow you, but nobody has the courage to say, I object to this wedding. Right? And they're all tense. It should over like a task. I have to get it done. And then there's a sigh of relief and there's a lunch or a dinner. Again, dinner you are organized properly. As we convert to more westernized way of doing, who sits where, etc. It's everything planned out. How about an Indian wedding? It's just joy. Who cares when you start and end? About 7 or 10 years ago, I went to my grandniece's wedding in Baroda, and in the middle of the wedding, the priest got a cell phone call. He took it. That was even more remarkable. Chatting away 25, 30 seconds on some other engagement or I don't know what he was doing. And nobody had any problem. It would be totally unacceptable behavior in a Christian wedding. Now, who is listening to the priest? Over there is a dead silence. You can't sneeze even. Isn't that interesting? So here the priest is saying Sanskrit, whatever he does. Only people paying attention are the parents out of obligation. The bride and the groom have no idea what's happening. And each table, people are chatting away. It's like a mela, very interesting. So who is right? Again, value judgments come and that's where we get into problems. Are the Northerners right about planning everything? Must have an annual budget, must have a 5-year strategic plan or 100-year strategic plan, okay? Matsushita Corporation used to do 100-year strategic plan. And there was a saying by a very famous economist, John Maynard Keynes, who said, in the long run, we are all dead anyhow. He didn't believe in that long-term theory. It's fascinating. So today, who is right? In management, the Western model, or the northern Western model, not the Italians and the Greeks, but the other side, actually means that you plan out, you'll be very efficient, your productivity very high. But there will be no joy, no emotive dimension. You're working like a machine. That I can do with artificial intelligence also. I don't need a human being, right? A robot priest can perform. He's going to repeat the same thing an hour after hour, another wedding, etc. See what I'm saying? To get the emotive side, it may or may not come from artificial intelligence or machine learning, because emotion is very personalized, very contextualized. We enjoy, so we are event bound, not time bound. Some cultures are time bound, northerns are usually time bound, and therefore they compartmentalize, which is fascinating. So uncertainty avoidance is the third dimension. Territoriality is primarily because the old cultures, you have very limited space in which you will habitate. Most of it is rugged mountains. I just did a tourism of New Zealand, north and south. It's so rugged like Alaska. There are only few places where you can put any habitation, any kind of a farming community, whether it's a sheep farming or a dairy farming, for example. So space is very important as a resource, scarce resource. Like money would be scarce resource, Time as a resource is very important. You can't waste it. And that's the key difference. For us, space is there. I can go to my neighbor's house, my kids will run around till I come home. It is as if it's their home, right? Have you seen every floor or chali, we call it in Gujarati? Neighbors are like an extended family, right? Their kids come over here. It's very fascinating. So that's a very key difference. Last dimension that we debate quite a lot is individualism versus collectivism, as it is called. So we define the family as extended family. Family means my parents, my wife, my children, but my uncles and aunts, my cousins, etc., that's family. Western world family is a nuclear family. Me, my wife, and my children. That's it. And we kick the children out at age 18. You should be on your own. Interestingly. You have to earn your own money to go to college. There are separate accounts. It's very fascinating, right? Again, collectivism versus individualism dimension can be explained. It's clearly I can have a correlation between North and South, and I can explain that better than any other cultural theory, which is the key point. So that's my discovery. I'm enjoying it. The book is written by going to prehistoric ways people lived before the farming community even came, and how they lived, why space was important in some tribal communities, for example, or truly natives, and why time was important and not in other places. It's the same concept by and large, but going back into the historical records. So the book has been a great journey for me. So that's my research project. I'm open to questions.
Yes, when you go from north to south, what state do you flip? Because this once you cross the equator, and you go keep going south, you're in southern Brazil or southern
Exactly.
Does that behavior become similar to Scandinavia?
Absolutely. So if you go to southern Arctic region, away from the equator on the south, it begins to behave the same way as you go north of the equator. So from tropical around the equator, then you go to temperate essentially, and then you go to, so southern island in New Zealand is very different than northern island. There's a long longevity. Within country, I found if a country has a long up and down, north-south, then I find that there are huge differences. So northern Italians behave very differently than southern Italians. Northern Italian pasta will be all based on cream sauces, Alfredo. Warmer climate like Naples and Rome will be all marinara sauce. Slight meat may be added, but it's not meat-based or saturated fat. Northern California is different than Southern California because it goes from temperate to tropical. Southern California and Texas are much more like Mexico than New York. So you can see the differences in America because it has a huge north-south axis, North America. And similarly, Chile and Argentina would be a lot closer to Scandinavia in many ways because they are so far south toward an Arctic climate essentially. So yeah, it goes both places.
The dimension of time, evolution, that we have not talked about, okay, with all this travel
Yeah.
and so on, and as time progresses, there has been a lot of mixing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why we are wearing the 3D suit here, our 2D suit. So have you looked at the effect of that?
In the digital world, the time interval is getting shorter and shorter. Just when the network is becoming faster and faster, let's say from 3G to 4G now, which is not only faster but has a bigger bandwidth, we are impatient. Today when I open my browser, I want an answer immediately. So I'm racing faster mentally by this external intervention, which is digital intrusion in my life. So we are warping the time in the process and the sense of time, So everybody is escalating, but the southern country people are not as much time driven as the northerners are, which is typically, even now, there's a difference. In fact, one of the key consequences of a time driven society, which is the worldwide event now taking place, especially with digital technology, time poverty creates more stress than money poverty. Otherwise, Pacific Islanders should be stressed out and New Yorkers should be happy. Evidence is just the opposite. New Yorkers are so much stressed, and Pacific Island people say, it does not matter. Nature is blessing me. I don't need to have possessions. I don't need to have a storage of income, into wealth of some sort, which is very interesting. So we think that technology is changing. Globalization is having an impact on this thing, and we are trying to monitor what are the societal consequences of that, positive or negative, both of them. Definitely time-oriented now makes you more productive in many ways, because you are counting time as a valuable resource. Some countries will be more productive than the others, even after all the technologies, is our expectation pretty much. So yes, it's true. Let me just tell you, interestingly, our students are now 24/7. So I get an email, because they have access, at 1 in the morning. And I have basically given in my syllabus saying that I will not respond. But they expect a response immediately, as if you are awake. They want you to be on their cycle, right? So I have basically put conditions as to when I can respond. It's very interesting. We use the Canvas as a platform now for all of our teaching. In fact, some universities in America, as you live in America, are now offering classes at midnight. Enough demand. And actually, it's students who demanded a class at midnight, because many of the students work to support themselves or their tuition. So they work in restaurants late at night, 11, 12 or something like that, then they want to come. So they work in time zones, or would be our graveyard shift in BPO, for example, right? Midnight shift, essentially, which is interesting. So afterwards they come and they still want to study. They are very hardworking people. They want to study, they want to earn money, as well as, in fact, they want to, have other life primarily. So given that, we're now having classes at midnight physically. We have shifted the whole curriculum quite a lot. Technology can be an enabler, so we are doing the flipping the class. Who said that I should lecture in the class? So we have professors basically videotaping their lectures. We put it up on Canvas. Student is accountable now, which is very interesting. They have to watch the whole video, because computer tells me whether they did it or not, or they were in the classroom. They can be absent-minded, but on that video assignment they cannot be absent-minded. See what I'm saying? So they come to the class prepared. You give pre-assignments. In the class, it's all discussion now. It's called flipping the class, as you know, primarily. So a lot of innovation is taking place on the teaching side by the technology, which is going to change the paradigm in the way we did the teaching, whether it's our old academies, right? Or Greek academies, where you had no time problem. You could debate and discuss a problem forever to discover the truth. Philosophy of science, ideation, like R&D guys do sometimes, laboratory people, scientists. We don't have that luxury anymore. Today, we have to deliver a research report after publication, or if the grant comes from NSF, for example, or in our case NIH. That's very fascinating. So this is changing the culture, homogenizing worldwide, because we are adopting a set of practices. It always has consequences, collateral effects of some sort, positive or negative. So as a sociologist, we are watching whether those effects are good for the society or bad for the society. Let me tell you one effect in India. The generation gap in India is only 8 years, not 25 years. The older sister cannot relate to the younger sister if they are 7-8 years apart, not in lifestyle, which is the external appearances, etc., but in a value systems. We are moving that fast. We are definitely moving toward children having no obligation in their mind that they have to take care of their parents. There's a social contract. That's going away. Okay? The young boy meets the young girl on the campus now, or someplace working place, as opposed to family arranging. We had this person, how many of you know bharatmatrimony.com? How many have used it? Or shadi.com, which is a little older probably. Admit it, it's okay. All of our young people are using online dating now. It's interesting. Or finding somebody, right? This gentleman came in our Delhi conference on 10th and 11th. He's the founder, and he says he does analytic segmentation better than anybody. He says, I had these broad buckets, You are a Tamilian, or you are a Telugu, or you are a Malayalam, the 4 basic South cultures. He said, parents want more than that. Which religion are you belonging to? Which caste do you belong to? Which village you come from? Community. Isn't it interesting? And he's having an enormous success. Micro-segmentation he does. He has how many? 300 separate groups he creates. Then he found that everybody comes, low-income people come, middle class, and very wealthy people come on matrimony.com. So he said, why not have wealthy people pay more? So he has come out with an elite, because wealthy people like to marry wealthy people. It's interesting. So very smartness. But that's the world we are going. The young people don't want to live with their parents. They will get married, and they would like to start their own home. Parents are a nuisance now. They interfere in my independence and privacy. They don't understand my world because it has changed so much. And they are the first-time buyers of everything in India. So consumer markets will just explode in India is our forecast. They buy cell phones, of course, it's a necessity in life, better than electricity. Then they might have a television maybe. They will have appliances, a two-wheeler at least starting out, motorcycle, and the other one, of course, is a car. Eventually a house, which is interesting. So they are creating new households altogether. So the number of households will grow faster in India than the population growth by definition. We don't count that as one household. That's clearly one factor we are finding it. And they're very different. They don't want to buy from neighborhood grocery stores, provision stores. You used to have a multi-generational relationship when I grew up. Because the merchant there funded the family, middle-class family, who somehow had a major event, cash flow from wages, went into that event, whatever it was, some health problem or whatever it is, and therefore he says, I will loan the money, I trust you as a family, you will always pay back. They want to buy today primarily in organized retail, big bazaar type, stores, or whatever the word we use in India. Last comment, and I'll stop because of the time. In India, even today, 65% of all consumption is unbranded. 90% of all services are unbranded. That's the largest segment. We only teach branded products. In India, again, about 80% is all unorganized sector selling it, marketing it. Organized sector is under 20% actually. If you want to be an entrepreneur, which most of you are aspiring now because that's the thing to do, management or engineering, doesn't make any difference. Very simple formula. Anything unbranded, make it branded and you will be a millionaire. Anything unorganized, get it organized. Now with the app, you can organize things, right? Supply chain and all the stuff, you'll be a millionaire. It's that simple a formula. And if you don't believe that, person who has done it, I would have never imagined he would be the best marketer, create a large 5,000 crore business in 5 years called Patanjali. I never imagined Baba Ramdev will be a marketer, So, or if he is a marketer, I thought he will market spirituality or maybe pranayam, something like that. But he is a better merchandiser, better marketer than Unilever. Nestle, they're all dreading this gentleman because he created unorganized, unbranded Ayurvedic products into organized, branded products, and now he has a platform. The latest news was that he is now negotiating with super luxury brands like Louis Vuitton, who wants to distribute at Patanjali. I can conceive in my mind. Isn't that interesting? This is the most fascinating country in the world. Don't think about going abroad. Stay here, either in education or in entrepreneurship. This is the excitement. Rest of the world wants to come here. And last comment, Subro, about 2 minutes, which I did in my convocation speech. There is a reason I'm doing this thing. I strongly encourage, we in this room are all highly privileged people. We may be in India less than 0.5% of the population. The society has given you so much, whether it's family or colleges or community, which means the day you are in these programs, you have an obligation to give back. Not after you retire, but starting now. Think about giving back. However you can do it. And I'll tell you why. If you take a grain of wheat and make it into a loaf of bread, the value add is only 3 times agricultural commodity value add. If you take a diamond, rough diamond, and polish it, good diamond cutter will get the value at 20 times roughly, better than agricultural product. But if you take a human being and polish the human being, nurture, mentor, educate, the value add is infinite. And the reason I'm saying is that it relates to me. I'm a refugee from Burma. I come from a merchant community where education is not the future. I would be less than a high school graduate. Think about that. Probably running back in India from Burma, coming back. A little shop, panwala, like outside the campus there might be some. I'll learn about 5,000-6,000 rupees a month, and I'll be happy because I did not know my own potential, right? Somebody got my potential out. I would have never imagined I would be a scholar. Think about that. Or make a difference in scholarship. That's interesting. So my view is that if I can do it coming from a merchant community with less than high school education as a norm, anybody can do it. So the biggest asset this country has is not agriculture. We are blessed with land, very fertile land, land of honey and milk, or industrial raw materials like the coal and iron ore and all the stuff. But the biggest asset is the human capital. And there is no noble profession than academic profession. We are here to shape human beings. We are here to get your potential out. To me, there is no profession more noble than education in the process. And that's what I really wanted to talk about, that please think about giving back the day you are graduating, not after you retire.
You raised the example of Peru, which is a very interesting example, because in a short area you go from the desert, the sea coast, to the heights of the Andes, 14,000 feet, and then on the other side to the Amazon rainforest. Have you looked at how these affect, in such a, because in such an area they're not going to be isolated communities. There are going to be a lot of mixing and.
No, exactly. It's a great question. There is a fourth category in the research that has come about, independent of the north-south, although it has certain things, which is the desert climate. Amazon is basically tropical, but rainforest type, extreme tropical. Singapore would be extreme tropical. Every day it rains, for example. And how do you manage that, right, as a consumer? But desert is very different. Desert food is different. So it's a frontier food, as we call it, toward Afghanistan. It's very dry. There are no gravies or curries, for example. And they survive on that because that's all that's available. Lamb becomes more preferred meat than anything else, for example. Chicken seems to be prevalent all over the world. Somehow it is a global consumption product if you are a non-vegetarian, for example. Milk is again very selective. So we are finding as you plot it, it's interesting. I do want to mention something because this theory enables a marketer to select the markets right. If you have a product of a desert climate and try to sell, except for a novelty curiosity, but as a daily necessity, you should go to other desert climates. If you have a tropical product, you should go to other tropical one. So Godrej, which is our company here, they're very good in mosquito repellent, right? And based upon this, they decided why should they go to America? Because mosquitoes there are different species. Same mosquito repellent does not work, it's chemistry or biochemistry. So they have immediately gone into Africa through acquisitions in 3 countries. They find there is no competition truly because the big boys like Johnson, SC Johnson, which is a big competitor, and they're all based upon chemicals in some fashion. They're not interested in those markets. So those markets are available because we know how to manage those markets. And I must tell you, it's excitement. Coming from outside as a tourist visitor here, I get excited. The diversity of consumption in India is mind-boggling. Every corner street vendor has his own unique recipe. The way he makes mithai, the way he makes namkeen, or the way he makes whatever, lassi, which is common in North, for example. If I can take that recipe, brand it, and scale it up. We used to think markets, think global, act global. Then we said, no, think global, act local because of the contextual things like regulation and economy and all this stuff. That's true, but today it's a reverse. Think local, act global. I can take that product, which is unique recipe, and scale it up globally in comparable geography. So it's giving you different insights, even from a business perspective. Although the book is not written from a business perspective, it's very interesting. So that's the answer. Okay, thank you again.
Thank you, Jag. It's truly been an honor. You all saw a small flavor of why he's a sort of a boundary spanner in his thinking. I wish we had more time to reflect on 2 books that he wrote now a decade ago. I think one, Tectonic Shift, was in some ways undermarketed and underappreciated, where Jag actually went against his own grain and predicted the shape of the world and the business alliances that would shape the world 50 years hence. He wrote this just before the year 2000. Would have been a fascinating thing to include. But in his view, is that still accurate? Your view is that India, America, and Brazil will in effect become a triad competing against the Chinese in their own and the Euro-Russian nexus, if I recall right? Is that still your view?
Today, people are de-risking from China worldwide. There's a whole geopolitical architecture. I do a lot of policy work in that area. So now you see a new thing, China versus US. The old triad power used to be North America, Canada and America. And of course, common market, 12 countries before the European Union. And Japan, which came later after World War II as a 3rd or the 2nd largest economy. They all had a harmony because America defeated the Japanese, America defeated the Germans, and therefore they imposed their own institutions like at Bretton Woods, the World Bank, the IMF on the one hand, created United Nations, but also in fact the policy-wise. What are the right policies for investment, right policies for trade? And when you analyze it, American corporations benefited enormously. When I used to go to Japan, my Japanese colleagues, scholars would say, Professor, do you know that there are at least 50 industries where American companies totally dominate our market? We don't complain it. If we dominated your market, you will have riots on the street. Coca-Cola, Pepsi dominates. There is no native. IBM dominated. No Fujitsu. No NEC. Alcatel dominated. I'm talking about, interestingly, today that's very different. China actually will have more large multinationals worldwide than any other nation, probably surpassing the Americans. They may have started as state enterprises, but they are behaving more like standalone corporations. Haier, how many of you know Haier is a brand name for appliances? They just made the acquisition of General Electric Appliances, which has exited the appliance business or consumer side completely, and that is bought by Haier. So Haier automatically becomes number 2 company in America. Lenovo is now number 1 in the world in PC business, not HP, not Dell. And it's a very interesting, predictable model. Made in Japan was a laughing stock in my generation in the 50s. They put the quality assurance, made sure cost is remaining low with better quality. Toyota became number 1. I was advising GM. And when I tell the General Motors that Toyota is what we need to watch, they say, no. We need to watch Ford. Rivalry between Ford and GM in Detroit is massive. All the way to school children, by the way. The children don't like to talk to each other, which is very interesting, right? Very fascinating, right? Suddenly they ignore Toyota. Now number 1 manufacturer in the world is Volkswagen. Americans will exit the auto business. Chrysler is owned by Fiat, for example. Ford may barely survive. GM had to go for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This was the icon of the industry. We created industrial revolution on the automobile industry because it has a huge multiplier. In order to do that, you have to buy steel, you have to buy etc. Today in the automobile, it's all electronics. Largest cost is all electronics today. Hardware and software, obviously now, with autonomous cars. Power has shifted already. So, and we are very large. Aditya Birla Group in flat aluminum sheet has bought a company in America called Novelis, and it is about $12 billion just there. They are like number 1 or number 2. Carbon black, they are number 1 actually. We just don't think about that. Same thing, cellular telephone, one of our companies will become among the global 3, it looks like, the way evolution is taking place. Whether it's Airtel or Reliance Jio, we don't know. That's the only debate, but it's going to happen. So I think there's a rise of multinationals from emerging markets. True from Brazil. I don't know whether you know, but through private equity capital, Brazilians actually own Heinz Corporation, icon of America. 3G Capital. Ketchup. And there are other brands. They have a mustard brand, just goes on. It's mind-boggling change. So I do believe that this tectonic shift says that it will be more emerging markets. And the biggest problem with advanced countries is that they're all aging, and aging more rapidly than we all forecasted. Most aging big nation is Japan. Every month there are fewer Japanese men than last month. There's nothing they can do. Because their immigration policy did not allow even Koreans to cross the border, let alone the Chinese, let alone the Filipinos, the Vietnamese, etc. They wanted to remain their culture, but now they're caught into the downward spiral. Same thing is happening in South Korea. Singapore is the same issues. And we think one of the key problems with China going forward 20, 30 years out is that one-child policy they enforced 2 generations ago is now coming to haunt them. Incentives don't work because young people don't want to produce more children. And when the woman becomes a working professional or a working clerical woman or factory woman, for example, you always have a disinclination to produce children. So we think China will age sooner than they forecasted, which is very interesting. So we are watching those trends, but power has clearly shifted toward Asia. That's the main point. Everybody is Asia-centric. Our Israeli Prime Minister who has come here, he's thinking of China as his market, India as his market, also Korea as his market. Every major nation from Europe is tilting now toward not America, but toward Asia. So Asia is the battleground pretty much both for everything, for markets, for resources, talent. And in India, in IT, I sat on the board of Wipro for 19 years. And we find fascinating, the largest recruiters in India now are companies like Accenture. Ernst & Young has 50,000 people working in Hyderabad alone. Multinationals need our raw material resource. At one time they might have come for coal or iron ore. At one time they might have come for our milk products, agriculture. We are the largest producer and consumer of milk. Now they're coming for the talent. Not to serve American market, but all markets in the world. They're all global corporations, essentially. That's the change. I'm sorry to take a longer time, but
No,
I'm very passionate. I think this country has more potential, and gods are blessing. So what's the rule of God's blessing? When Goddess Lakshmi comes, you don't look in the mirror and say, I still have some smear here, I have this problem, etc. Let me go and wash my face. You take the blessing at that time, because Goddess may not wait for you. Interesting. We missed twice. After the independence, both US allies wanted to outsource manufacturing to India in the 50s. We said no, because we think about the colonial aspects, right? We would be the largest manufacturing nation, not China, not Taiwan, not even Japan for that matter. Think about that. We missed another boat when Mrs. Gandhi had to align strategically to defend the nation, align with Soviet Union, which put us about 25 years back. So now we have a third chance, and I just hope, and I'm very optimistic, I think we will get it done this time. Okay? So I think future is here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jag. Partly influenced by him, you know, and those of you, of course, you know, in the School of Management, we have a Look East policy. One of the reasons why we're encouraging especially undergrads to learn Mandarin. But the fact of the matter is that one of the stirring statistics is that by the year 2100, as much as 40% of world trade, 4 out of every $10, may just be bilateral between India and China. So there's never been a better time to start looking east, to look at your new ventures. So it's not just look west in that regard. And the last thing I'll share with you in that note, Jag, is that we were all as a world community fascinated by the emergence of the Mekong Delta. You know, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, that whole area, 400 million new consumers. Now India's northeast, if you look at the northeast, which is the least developed part of India and Myanmar, and there's another 400 million people waiting to come into the world economy. So the opportunities truly are eastward. So anyway, with that note, thank you so much, Jack.